When the Khmer Rouge swept across Cambodia in the 1970s, they emptied the cities and forced the entire population into rural labor camps, killing a quarter of their own citizens. 2 decades earlier, Mao's Great Leap Forward in China resulted in the starvation of up to 50 million people. We see the echoes of this today in Venezuela. A nation that was once Latin America's wealthiest now sees 95% of its population living in poverty. Nearly 8 million people have fled across the border to escape a collapsed peacetime economy. When confronted with this historical record, the common defense is to blame the individuals in charge. People argue that dictators like Stalin, Mao, or Maduro were simply corrupt, and that true, pure socialism has never actually been implemented. We need to draw a sharp line here. The Nordic countries, often brought up as success stories, are market democracies. They rely on private property, business competition, and floating prices, layered with a heavy welfare state. We are specifically looking at one-party, centrally planned command economies, where the state owns the means of production. The devastating famines, the rapid hyperinflation, and the forced prison camps we see in these systems are not implementation bugs. They are the mathematical and structural inevitabilities of central planning. When a government decides to erase the spontaneous, decentralized network of a market and replace it with absolute top-down control, the economy breaks. And to enforce that broken economy, the state has to break the society itself. The core mechanism of this failure was identified a century ago by economists Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek. They pointed to the economic calculation problem, a fatal information gap that occurs when a society operates in the absence of market prices. A functioning market is essentially a decentralized supercomputer. The prices you see on shelves are highly compressed data packets. They communicate massive amounts of information about resource scarcity, human effort, risk, and consumer demand. Millions of people buying and selling act as nodes, automatically routing resources to where they are most needed. If the state confiscates the factories, the land, and the raw materials, that buying and selling stops. The market is unplugged. The price signals vanish instantly. Suddenly, central planners are left groping in the dark. They have no objective metric to know if using a ton of steel to build a tractor is more efficient than using it to build a bridge. Without those dynamic prices, rational economic calculation is literally impossible. A planning committee can collect all the data they want, but without price signals, they are mathematically guaranteed to misallocate their resources. This mathematical blindness breeds a very specific kind of arrogance, a mindset political scientist James C. Scott called high modernism. This is the belief that the government can force administrative legibility onto a complex society, stripping away messy, organic local knowledge and forcing everything into a neat, measurable grid. We see the ultimate extreme of this in Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward. The central government mandated pseudo-scientific farming techniques across the entire country, like planting seeds far too close together, entirely ignoring generations of local farming expertise. The crops failed on a massive scale. Up to 50 million people died of starvation. The attempt to engineer an agrarian utopia from a central desk destroyed the food supply entirely. In the industrial Soviet bloc, this phenomenon was documented by economist Janos Kornai as the shortage economy. Instead of responding to what consumers actually wanted, factories chased arbitrary political quotas. This created a bizarre, permanent paradox. Citizens would spend hours waiting in the freezing cold just to buy bread or shoes, while state warehouses sat overflowing with thousands of identical, poorly made products that nobody wanted. Man-made famines and chronic breadlines are not temporary glitches. They are the direct, unavoidable physical manifestations of a dead price signal network. When the central plan inevitably fails to produce prosperity, the state faces a choice. It cannot admit that the underlying math is broken. Instead, it has to declare that the citizens are uncooperative, subversive, or hiding resources. This immediately leads to physical containment. To keep starving rural populations from flooding into the cities and collapsing the industrial centers, regimes implement strict internal passports. Systems like the Soviet Propiska or the Chinese hukou legally bound people to their birthplaces. making it a crime to travel or seek work elsewhere. To enforce this failing plan, the state turns to total societal surveillance. In East Germany, the Stasi secret police kept extensive files on their own citizens, using psychological terror and neighbors spying on neighbors to crush any hint of dissent. They also weaponize the classroom. The education system shifts from teaching objective truth to manufacturing loyalty. During the Cultural Revolution, millions of Chinese youth were brainwashed to value political fanaticism above all else, to the point where they violently turned on their own teachers and parents. Concentrated economic control inherently demands concentrated political control. When you destroy the natural financial incentives that motivate people to work and cooperate, authoritarian violence becomes the only tool left to hold a society together. There is a deep irony to the command economy. No matter how much force the state applies, it can never truly eliminate the market. It only forces it into the shadows. Whenever official channels fail, citizens build an informal economy of favors to survive. In the Soviet Union, this was called blat, an underground network of personal connections used to acquire the basic goods that were missing from empty store shelves. We see the exact same shadow resilience today in Venezuela with the practice of bachakeo. As the government prints money to cover massive deficits, hyperinflation renders the official currency worthless. People are forced into massive black market smuggling networks just to afford a single meal. Paradoxically, these illegal, spontaneous networks of exchange actually prop up the authoritarian regimes. By filling the massive gaps left by central planning, the black market prevents the entire population from starving to death all at once. Even after these regimes fall or attempt to reform, the invisible wreckage remains. Decades of coercive schooling and forced compliance leave behind deeply de-skilled populations, stunted academic freedom, and a pervasive culture of civic distrust, where hypocrisy was a required survival skill. The historical record establishes a clear law. Any system built on the suppression of private property and the eradication of market coordination will inevitably collapse under the weight of its own immense complexity. Economic freedom, free speech, and property rights are not merely philosophical ideals. They are the indispensable structural foundations required for any complex human society to survive, adapt, and thrive.